Something about Keith Urban feels different lately, and even longtime fans can sense it. For years, he carried himself like someone who had mastered the chaos of fame. The smile was steady. The performances were electric. The marriage looked unshakable. From the outside, Keith Urban seemed like one of the rare celebrities who had somehow figured out how to survive the spotlight without losing himself in it. But then, almost quietly, things began to shift. It wasn't one dramatic moment that made people pay attention. It was the little things. A different energy during performances. A sharper edge in his appearance. More emotional intensity in familiar songs. Fans started noticing that the man standing on stage no longer looked like someone simply entertaining a crowd. He looked like someone rebuilding himself in real time. And once people started connecting the dots, the story behind that transformation became impossible to ignore. Because the truth is, Keith Urban didn't just change his style or his music. He changed his entire life. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, heartbreak forced him into a chapter he never expected to face publicly. But instead of disappearing, instead of retreating from the spotlight, Keith did something few people saw coming. He started over. Not with a dramatic press conference, not with scandal-filled interviews, but with small, deliberate choices that slowly revealed a completely different version of the man people thought they knew. And that transformation may be the most fascinating chapter of his life yet. For most celebrities, success becomes a trap. The bigger the career gets, the harder it becomes to change. Fans expect consistency. Labels expect reliability. The public expects the same version of a person forever. But Keith Urban suddenly found himself in a position where staying the same no longer felt possible. The end of his marriage marked more than emotional heartbreak. It shattered the structure that had defined his life for years. Family routines changed. Priorities shifted. The stability he had spent years building suddenly looked fragile. And for the first time in a very long time, Keith had to ask himself a difficult question. Who was he outside of the life he had carefully built? That question seemed to follow him everywhere. At first, people assumed he would throw himself into massive tours and nonstop work the way many artists do after personal upheaval. But instead, Keith surprised almost everyone. Rather than chasing giant stadium crowds, he stepped into smaller, more intimate performances that felt deeply personal. One of the most unexpected moves came when he joined a country music cruise event, performing in front of relatively small audiences under open skies instead of massive arenas packed with screaming fans. To outsiders, it seemed strange. Why would a superstar willingly scale things down? But those performances revealed something important. Keith wasn't chasing spectacle anymore. He was chasing connection. Fans who attended those shows noticed an entirely different atmosphere around him. The performances felt rawer, less polished, more emotional. He interacted differently with the audience, almost like someone rediscovering why he fell in love with music in the first place. There was no giant production hiding him, no overwhelming stage effects, just Keith, a guitar, and songs that suddenly carried new meaning. And the audience felt it. At the same time, changes were happening behind the scenes that signaled this wasn't temporary. After decades of working with longtime collaborators and management figures, Keith began making bold professional changes too. Relationships that had once defined his career quietly came to an end as he surrounded himself with new creative influences. That kind of decision doesn't happen lightly. For someone like Keith Urban, whose career was built on consistency and loyalty, walking away from long-time partnerships suggested something much deeper was happening internally. He wasn't simply adjusting his schedule, he was reinventing the environment around him completely. And that reinvention started showing up everywhere. His music choices became more experimental. His style evolved. Fans noticed he looked leaner, sharper, more confident. Tattoos that once felt personal suddenly looked symbolic, like visible reminders of the life he had lived and the identity he was trying to reshape. But to really understand why this transformation matters so much, you have to go much further back, long before the fame, the marriage, and the headlines. Before the awards and sold-out tours, Keith Urban was just a kid growing up in Australia with an obsession for music. He wasn't raised in the glamorous world people associate with celebrity culture. Life was simple, quiet, predictable. But from an early age, there was already something intense about the way he approached music. He didn't just casually play guitar, he studied it. While other kids drifted between hobbies, Keith stayed locked in, repeating chords, correcting mistakes, practicing until every sound felt right. There was already perfectionism in him, even as a child, and that perfectionism would eventually become both his greatest strength and one of the biggest emotional burdens of his life. As he got older, his focus only became stronger. He joined local bands, performed anywhere he could, and slowly built a reputation for relentless dedication. But deep down, he knew staying comfortable would never get him where he wanted to go. That realization pushed him toward Nashville. Moving there was a risk that could have easily failed. He arrived without guarantees, stepping into one of the most competitive music scenes in the world. Nashville had no reason to hand him success, simply because he was talented. And for a while, it didn't. Keith played small venues. Sometimes people barely paid attention. Opportunities came slowly. Rejection became normal. But instead of breaking his confidence, those struggles sharpened his discipline even more. He kept improving. He studied legendary artists carefully, paying attention not only to technical skill, but emotional honesty. He realized audiences didn't just want perfect music. They wanted authenticity. They wanted to feel something real. That lesson became the foundation of his career. By the late 90s and early 2000s, audiences started responding to him in a major way. Keith Urban wasn't just another country singer. There was emotional sincerity in his performances that made people feel connected to him. But while his career exploded publicly, pressure was building privately. Fame moves fast, and success often hides problems instead of solving them. Touring constantly, living under pressure, and trying to maintain perfection eventually started taking a toll. Like many artists, Keith found himself leaning on unhealthy coping mechanisms. From the outside, everything still looked incredible. That's what makes these situations so dangerous. People often assume success automatically equals happiness. It doesn't. And right in the middle of that chaos, Nicole Kidman entered his life. Their connection moved quickly. Friends around them noticed the chemistry immediately. Both had demanding careers. Both understood pressure. Both carried emotional scars from previous chapters of life. What developed between them seemed genuine from the start. For Keith, Nicole became more than a partner. She became emotional stability during one of the darkest periods of his life. Not long after their marriage, Keith made one of the most difficult decisions he would ever make publicly. At a moment when his career was soaring, he admitted he needed help and entered rehab. That decision changed everything. Many celebrities spend years protecting their image at all costs. Keith did the opposite. He exposed vulnerability publicly, knowing people would judge him for it. But that honesty may have saved his life. And throughout that period, Nicole remained beside him. Keith later spoke openly about how much her support meant during recovery. He described her as someone who stood beside him while he learned how to rebuild himself from the inside out. Recovery wasn't instant. It took discipline, setbacks, and painful self-awareness. But eventually, stability returned. Over time, they built what looked like an extraordinary life together. 2 daughters, successful careers, public appearances filled with warmth and affection. To fans, Keith and Nicole became one of those rare celebrity couples that genuinely seemed solid, and for years, they appeared exactly that way. But fame creates pressure most people never fully see. Careers pulled them in different directions constantly. Keith toured for months at a time while Nicole traveled across countries filming projects. Time apart became routine. Public scrutiny never disappeared. Every appearance, every interaction, every rumor became magnified. Still, they kept going. That's what makes what happened later feel so shocking. Because from the outside, they looked untouchable. Even during periods where stress quietly built beneath the surface, they maintained the image of balance and partnership. Keith continued writing songs about love and devotion. Nicole publicly supported him. Together, they represented stability in an industry known for chaos. But over time, subtle cracks started forming. Long absences slowly create emotional distance, even in strong relationships. Careers that demand constant movement eventually leave very little room for ordinary life. And maintaining the image of perfection can become exhausting. People close to them later suggested those pressures quietly accumulated for years. Then came the period that changed everything. As Keith toured heavily, fans began noticing subtle emotional changes in his performances. Familiar songs carried different energy. Lyrics sounded heavier. There were moments on stage that suddenly felt deeply personal, even when nothing specific was said outright. At the same time, Keith made surprising changes within his professional circle, parting ways with longtime collaborators he had worked beside for decades. Publicly, it was framed as creative evolution. Privately, many suspected something bigger was unfolding. And eventually, the rumors became reality. The marriage ended. For fans who had watched Keith and Nicole survive addiction struggles, career pressure, and years in the spotlight together, the news felt genuinely shocking. People assumed they would last forever. But real life is rarely that simple. The divorce didn't just end a relationship, it forced Keith into an entirely new identity. Suddenly, he wasn't part of the life people had associated with him for nearly 20 years. And instead of collapsing under the weight of that change, he transformed. That transformation became visible almost immediately. Fans noticed he looked physically different, leaner, more energized. His wardrobe became bolder. His stage presence carried a confidence mixed with vulnerability that audiences hadn't seen before. But the biggest changes weren't visual. They were emotional. Songs that once sounded romantic suddenly carried sadness, reflection, and resilience. Performances became more intimate. There was a raw honesty in the way he delivered lyrics, almost like he was processing heartbreak through music in real time. People started reinterpreting old songs differently. Small lyric changes during concerts sparked endless discussion online. Fans analyzed every performance for emotional clues. Keith rarely addressed speculation directly. Instead, he let the music speak for him. And somehow, that silence made everything even more compelling. Because audiences could sense authenticity. This didn't feel like a manufactured comeback designed by a publicity team. It felt like a man genuinely trying to rediscover himself after his world changed. That honesty resonated deeply. One reason fans connected so strongly to this new chapter is because Keith wasn't pretending to have all the answers. His transformation didn't look flashy or arrogant. It looked human. He wasn't acting like heartbreak made him stronger overnight. He looked like someone learning how to move forward one day at a time. That humility changed how people viewed him. For years, Keith Urban had been admired as a superstar musician. Now, many people started admiring him for something else entirely: resilience. And perhaps the most fascinating part of this entire story is that the reinvention wasn't limited to music. Keith also began re-evaluating the pace and structure of his career itself. Instead of focusing exclusively on massive stadium tours, he started showing interest in more intimate experiences where real audience connection mattered more than scale. Fans attending smaller performances described a completely different atmosphere compared to earlier years. The walls between performer and audience felt thinner. People weren't just watching a celebrity perform anymore. They were witnessing someone emotionally rebuilding himself through art. And audiences connected to that vulnerability in a powerful way.